Hi, welcome to Voice Leading Basics Mini Lecture 1. In these lectures, I'm going to try to set up all the little things that you'll need to know in order to write the four-part chorale style pieces that you're going to be writing for Music Theory 1. And in this first one, all I'm going to do is define what voice leading is, and then also define some types of relative motion between parts. And then we'll cover some more things over the course of 3 or so other lectures. Voice leading is the words that we use to refer to the way that the different parts in multi-part music relate to each other as harmony changes. If you think about so much music that has a melody on top and a bass line on the bottom, and then one or more things going on in between the two, then you've got 3 or 4 or more parts happening. And we're going to generically refer to these parts as voices, even if they're not vocal parts, although the ones you're going to be writing at first at least will be. The way that these parts move when the harmony changes is important because we want the music to have coherence, not just harmonically, but also in the melodic dimension, the horizontal dimension. All of the parts, the melody, the bass, the inside parts, should make sense as melodic lines. They're not just random notes of chords, but actually functional and, by the way, in the chorale style, singable lines. So you get coherence this way and also on the harmonic dimension. The way that we achieve that is what we call voice leading. Now let's take our parts and reduce them down to 2 to talk about the different kinds of relative motion. Relative motion is the way that the 2 parts, or any parts, move against each other. And I'm going to define for you 4 types of relative motion. And I've put some examples up on the board. Up here, the very first kind I'm going to talk about is what's called contrary motion because it's probably the easiest to explain. When 2 voices move in opposite directions, so for example here the lower voice moves up while at the same time the upper voice moves down, so they come close to each other, we call that contrary motion. And if you reverse that, and here you see this upper voice moves up and the lower voice moves down, so they move away from each other, we also call that contrary motion. As long as they're moving in opposite directions, one going up, the other going down, it's contrary motion. But what if they're going the same direction? Well, there's 2 things that could happen there. Here I've written a line that goes up a step and then down a third. And then below that, a third below, I've written another line that also goes up a step and down a third. And so these 2 parts stay the same distance apart, a third. And so we call that parallel motion. And in parallel motion, just like parallel lines, like railroad tracks, the 2 parts, if one moves, the other moves the same amount, the same direction, and so they stay the same distance apart. And we would say that these 2 lines are moving in parallel thirds because they stay a third apart harmonically by moving the same distance melodically. But what if they're moving in the same direction but not by the same amount? Here is what's called similar motion. You can see that both voices are moving up, but the top voice is moving up a step and the bottom voice is moving up a fifth. So we call that similar motion. And it tends to happen this way, where the upper voice, being more like a melody, tends to move more conjunctly by step, while the lower voice, if we think of that as being like a bass line, that'll move more disjunctly. It'll tend to leap around, sort of if you think of a bass line going bum, 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 it's like that. And then finally, I promised you 4 kinds. We have oblique. Oblique motion occurs when one of the parts doesn't move while the other one moves. And the voice that doesn't move might repeat a note or it might hold a note. I've made my example with a repeated note because in the chorale style, usually everybody has the same words and therefore everybody has the same rhythm. So tends to be that if one of the parts stays on a note while the other one's moving, it's because it's repeating. But it could just as easily be that one of the parts is holding while the other one is moving. We would also call that oblique motion. All right, that's the first lecture. We'll pick it up again in another one, and I will see you in class.